Part 1. The Beginning. Lisa and Mark were an example of an ideal couple, which other friends and acquaintances looked up to. They met in college, where Mark studied law and Lisa studied botany. Their romantic relationship developed rapidly. Common interests, mutual support, and love of traveling created a solid foundation for their future life. A few years after graduation, they got married and bought a country house in the suburbs, which became their personal refuge from the bustle of the big city. Mark was a successful lawyer. He specialized in family law and often said that he helps people find justice. His colleagues and clients respected him for his honesty and incorruptibility. Lisa, in turn, opened a small but popular flower shop in which every corner breathed her soul and love for plants. Her shop became a place of meeting and joy for many local residents. Their life seemed cloudless. They spent their evenings having dinner, discussing the past day, making plans for the future, and dreaming about children. But suddenly everything changed. Mark began to feel inexplicably weak and in pain. At first, they attributed it to fatigue, but the symptoms became more and more alarming. Mark lost his appetite, began to tire quickly, and even the simplest actions were difficult for him. After numerous visits to doctors and endless tests, the diagnosis sounded like a death sentence and incurable disease. It was a neurological disease that slowly but surely destroyed his body. Doctors said that Mark did not have much time left, and the best that could be done was to maintain his comfort and his suffering. Lisa was in shock. She could not believe that their happy life was crumbling before their eyes. Her heart was breaking from pain and fear of the future, but she tried to be strong, supporting Mark and hoping for a miracle. She devoted all her energy to caring for her husband, while also running the store. But anxiety and loneliness were growing inside her. Every day, Mark became weaker. He could no longer work and spent most of his time in bed. Lisa took care of him, fed him, helped with medical procedures, but her own life turned into an endless cycle of worries and suffering. She felt her strength leaving her, and her soul was weighed down by the weight of responsibility and fear. It was at this point that Jacob appeared in her life. He was a young and attractive neighbor who often came into her store to buy flowers for his mother. Jacob was charming and caring, and Lisa felt attracted to him. At first, they just talked, shared stories from their lives, and Lisa felt her anxiety subside a little. Soon their conversations turned into something more. Lisa began meeting Jacob outside the store. He invited her to dinners, and Lisa found comfort in these meetings. She knew it was wrong, but the feeling of loneliness and fear of the future pushed her into the arms of another man. They spent more and more time together, and their affair gained momentum. Mark, lying in his bed, noticed changes in his wife's behavior. He saw her leaving in the evenings and returning late at night. He knew what was happening, and it tore his heart apart, but he was too weak to change anything. He could only watch his love betray him and accumulate anger and despair inside himself. Every night was torture for Mark. He lay in the dark, listening to the silence, which only intensified his feeling of betrayal. He knew that his days were numbered, and that Lisa, despite everything they had been through together, had betrayed him at the most difficult moment. A thirst for revenge was growing in his soul, which grew stronger with each passing day. Part 2. Infidelity. Lisa tried to cope with the situation as best she could. She balanced between caring for Mark and working in her flower shop. But at some point, everything became unbearable for her. Loneliness and fear of the unknown that awaited her ahead made her vulnerable to temptation. With Jacob, everything started innocently. He often came to her shop, bought flowers, and talked to Lisa about little things. She was pleased by his attention, and she began to feel something more for him. Soon the relationship moved to a new level. Jacob became her comfort, her secret refuge from the pain and fear that she experienced every day. The first kiss happened unexpectedly. Lisa was closing the shop, and Jacob came in to say goodbye. He looked at her with such tenderness and understanding that she could not resist. This kiss was like a breath of fresh air for a drowning man. That night, she felt alive for the first time in a long time. But her guilt quickly overtook her. Lisa knew that she was cheating on Mark at his most difficult moment, but she couldn't stop. Each meeting with Jacob gave her a feeling of freedom and happiness that she hadn't experienced for a long time. They spent more and more time together, and the relationship became more and more intimate. Mark, despite his weakness, noticed everything. He saw Lisa returning home with a gleam in her eyes that he hadn't seen for a long time. He felt her moving away from him, and he understood that her heart now belonged to someone else. His soul was filled with bitterness and hatred, but he could do nothing. His illness was taking away his last strength, leaving him a helpless witness to the betrayal. Lisa tried to hide her relationship with Jacob, but the more she tried, the more obvious it became to Mark. He silently watched her, accumulating anger and pain within himself. Every night was torture for him, and every minute was an ordeal. He knew he was dying, and he knew his wife had already buried him in her mind, replacing him with another. Mark tried to talk to Lisa, but every time his words were drowned out by her excuses and lies. She assured him that she was just going away to clear her head, that she needed time to herself to deal with the stress, but he saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't love him anymore, and that was killing him faster than the disease. In the last days of his life, Mark felt the darkness taking over his soul. He couldn't forgive Lisa for her betrayal, and he couldn't come to terms with the thought of dying alone, abandoned by the one he loved most in the world. He swore to himself that he would find a way to get revenge, even if it cost him peace in the afterlife. When Mark died, Lisa felt relieved. Her torment was over, and she could start a new life with Jacob, but their happiness was short-lived. Soon after the funeral, strange things began to happen in the house. Lisa felt the presence of someone invisible, heard whispers at night, and noticed how objects moved on their own. She tried not to attach any importance to it, writing it off as her imagination. But one night, when she and Jacob were together, the light suddenly went out and the room became unnaturally cold. Jacob felt something grab him by the neck. Lisa heard a familiar whisper and realized that it was Mark. He had returned for his revenge. Part 3. Ghostly Haunting. After Mark's death, Lisa felt like her life could return to normal. She and Jacob could finally be together openly, without hiding or feeling guilty. They tried to forget about what happened and began planning their future, but Mark wasn't going to leave them alone that easily. Soon after the funeral, strange and inexplicable events began to happen in the house. The first thing Lisa noticed was the cold that never left their house. Despite the warm weather outside, it was unbearably cold inside. Lisa tried to explain it by a malfunction of the heating system, but no amount of repairs helped. Lisa couldn't sleep at night. She was tormented by nightmares in which Mark came to her and accused her of betrayal. She woke up in a cold sweat, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. Jacob also began to notice strange things. He heard footsteps in the hallway, even though no one was home. One night, he woke up with the feeling that someone was standing by his bed, looking at him, but when he turned on the light, no one was there. With each passing day, Mark's presence became more and more noticeable. Lisa felt his cold fingers touch her skin when she sat there alone. She heard whispers coming from empty rooms and saw shadows flickering around corners. Her guilt and fear grew, turning each day into torture. One evening, Lisa, alone at home, decided to take a bath to relax. She lay in the hot water, trying to get rid of thoughts of Mark, but suddenly the water in the tub turned ice cold. Lisa jumped up, shivering from the cold, and saw how the steam from her breath rose into the air. In the mirror above the sink, she saw Mark's reflection standing behind her. His eyes were burning with hatred, and he was looking right at her.
"You betrayed me,"
Mark whispered. Lisa screamed and ran out of the bathroom, feeling like her heart was about to jump out of her chest. She tried to call Jacob, but the phone was not working. All her attempts to contact anyone ended in failure. She felt like the house was becoming her prison, and Mark's ghost was her warden. The next day, Lisa told Jacob about what had happened. He tried to calm her down, saying that it was just a figment of her imagination, but he himself felt that something was wrong. That night, when they went to bed, the light suddenly went out and the room became unnaturally cold. Jacob felt something invisible grab him by the neck. He began to choke. His eyes widened in horror. Lisa heard a familiar whisper and realized that it was Mark.
You betrayed me.
Mark repeated. Jacob tried to break free, but his strength was fading. Lisa, in a panic, tried to help him, but her hands passed through the air, as if she were trying to catch smoke. She realized that Mark's ghost was full of hatred and was determined to punish her and Jacob for their betrayal. Mark was not going to stop. Every night turned into torture for Lisa and Jacob. They could not sleep, could not feel safe. Mark's ghost was with them always, reminding them of his thirst for revenge. Lisa realized that their torment would not end until she paid for her betrayal. Part 4. Escalation of horror. Lisa and Jacob tried to find a way to cope with what was happening. They went to a priest, who performed a ritual of cleansing the house, but it did not help. Mark was too strong. His spirit was full of hatred and was not going to leave them so easily. Each evening the house became colder and colder, and Lisa felt that the end was near. One night, Lisa was awakened by strange noises coming from the living room. She carefully descended the stairs and saw how the furniture was moving on its own. The lamps flickered, creating ominous shadows on the walls. Mark stood in the center of the room, his ghostly figure shrouded in cold light.
You thought you could run away from me?
He whispered. Lisa felt her legs give way in fear. Mark began to approach her, his face distorted with anger. Lisa tried to run, but the door wouldn't open, as if it was locked by an invisible force. At that moment, Jacob ran into the living room, hearing Lisa's screams. He saw Mark and Francie. Not knowing what to do, Mark turned to him, and hatred blazed in his eyes.
You took everything from me,
he said, and the next moment, Jacob felt his legs give way. He fell to the floor, suffocating from the cold that gripped his body. Lisa screamed, begging Mark to stop, but the ghost was adamant. He raised his hand, and Jacob felt his soul leave his body. Mark's gaze was directed straight at him, and there was not an ounce of mercy in that gaze. Soon, Jacob's body frowned, and Lisa realized that he was dead.
Now it's your turn,
Mark whispered, turning to Lisa. She felt cold hands tightening around her neck. She tried to scream, but the sounds were stuck in her throat. Mark was slowly strangling her, enjoying her suffering. Lisa could only see his eyes, full of hatred and pain. Neighbors who heard the screams called the police. When they arrived, the house was plunged into silence. Inside, they found the bodies of Lisa and Jacob lying on the living room floor. No one could explain what had happened. Lisa's death looked like strangulation, but there were no signs of physical injury on her neck. The house was considered cursed, and no one dared to live there anymore. They say that in the silence of the night, you can't hear Mark's whispers and his sinister laughter, a reminder that betrayal does not go unpunished. The legend of Lisa and Mark became a local horror story, warning everyone about the consequences of infidelity and betrayal. Now everyone who passes by their house remembers this terrible story and tries not to look at the windows, behind which ghosts of the past may be hiding.